Hey, what is happening, you lucky Luxray? Today we're going to be taking a look at the deck that I used to win my first major tournament all the way back in 2010, the New England Regional Championships in the Masters Division. Now, things were a lot different back then. I believe we played 7 rounds in day 1, and then we cut to a top 32 in day 2. And day 1 was best of 1 as well. We played best of 1 in day 1, and then cut to a top 32, best 2 out of 3 in day 2, and I believe we only had like 140 people at that regional championships, if I'm remembering correctly. It wasn't 200. We weren't quite at 200 people. I know that for sure, but I think it was around like 140. I don't really remember for sure. It was a long time ago. Before we jump into it, though, and I explain how this deck works, gotta give a big shout out to Dragon Shield, as always, for being a sponsor of my content here on the YouTube channel and with the live streams as well here and over on Twitch, and as a competitor in the Pokemon TCG. I've been using Dragon Shield sleeves long before I was partnered with them and plan to be using them for a long time to come. Check them out, dragonshield.com. Of course, a link will be in the description, and you can use code AzulGG over there as well to get yourself a discount. So let's start off by talking about the strategy of this deck, or what this deck tries to do. The main attackers in the deck are the Dunsparce and the Shuppet with the Fade Out attack. Dunsparce for a colorless energy does 20 damage and then returns itself to your hand, and then Shuppet does 30 damage and then returns itself to your hand, and all cards attached to it, the energy, tool cards, and item cards. The reason the Dunsparce is important is because there's the Garchomp C in the format that is weak to colorless, which is one of the, maybe the most used attacker in the format at the time. And also there's some stuff that's like resistance to Psychic, so Dunsparce being able to hit a little bit harder than Shuppet was nice for the resistance as well. I know you're probably saying, Azul, this Pokemon does 30 damage, and this one does 20 damage. And I know HP on Pokemon back in 2010 was lower, but not that low. And you are correct, it wasn't 30 and 20 HP Pokemon we were trying to knock out. So let's get to the next part of the deck, and that is the Expert Belts and the Plus Power. Now, you can only ever have one tool card attached to a Pokemon. We play 2 of them, so we don't prize it, or are less likely to prize both of them, and it's a little bit easier to find. Expert Belt increases the damage and HP of your Pokemon by 20, but then you give up an additional prize card. But when we're attaching the Expert Belt to a Shuppet and it returns to our hand, it's never in play for our opponent to actually get an extra prize card on. And then we have the Plus Powers. Now, Plus Power was reprinted after 2010, but this Plus Power, this printing of Plus Power, actually attached to your Pokemon. I don't know about the older ones, to be honest. I think there was an older Plus Power pre-2010. This is actually the Harklesoul Silver Plus Power here, because the Harklesoul Silver has just the best artworks of everything. But these Plus Powers attached to your Pokemon, and then when attached to the Pokemon on a Shuppet, it would, with the Expert Belt, be returned to your hand. So if you're able to find all 4 of your Plus Powers and your Expert Belt, and you get them all on the Shuppet, and then attack with Fade Out, you're dealing 90 damage and going back to your hand, which is pretty considerable damage for 2010. 90 is nothing to scoff at. Of course, it's not as much as some of the HP of the higher HP Pokemon, but when we're attacking on the first turn, and ideally every turn after that, we can build up a decent prize lead before our opponent gets to their bigger Pokemon, which we can then 2-hit KO. So, main attackers, Shuppet and the Dunsparce, and the main tools for increasing their damage, the Expert Belt and the Plus Power. But of course, when we attack with the Shuppet and the Dunsparce, we're going from the active spot to our hand, which means you have to promote a new Pokemon. And the Pokemon we would promote most of the time is the Mr. Mime. The Mr. Mime has an ability that says if our opponent doesn't have more than 2 energy cards attached to it, they can't deal damage to Mr. Mime. Now, there wasn't a ton of gust effects back in the format. There was Luxray with its Bright Look, Warp Point, which is Escape Rope, but with a different name, and then there was stuff like Double Blower Plus, which we play in this deck actually, and we'll talk about in a second. But there wasn't a ton of ways around the Mr. Mime, and a lot of the decks attacked for pretty low energy costs. Gyarados took 0 energy to attack with, Jumpluff took 1 energy to attack with, and SP decks generally took 1 to 2 energy to attack with, but the SP decks did have stuff like Bright Look, which was effectively a gust effect like Boss's Orders as an ability, and then also had Garchomp, which sniped our bench. And there was no bench protection Pokemon like Manaphy back in the day to protect us from the Garchomp, so we were getting sniped. But generally, we took the first prize in the SP matchup, and then we were able to take a prize card every single turn after that, so we were able to maintain a prize lead against SP most of the time, and then we'd be able to just win the game. Even if they were taking a prize card every turn, we took the first prize card, and we'll be able to close out the game from there. And our other attacker in the deck is actually what allows us to maintain that prize lead most of the time. The other Pokemon Pokemon we sometimes would set up into the active is the Mamoswine GL, which has an ability that says in between turns, put 1 damage counter on your opponent's Pokemon that aren't any water Pokemon. I forgot for a second, but excluding water Pokemon, put 1 damage counter on your opponent's Pokemon in between turns. So a way to increase our damage for turn. The big thing with Mamoswine is it has that 100 HP, which in some matchups against some decks, they wouldn't actually be able to KO the Mamoswine. Or if they had eventually built up an attacker that has those 3 energy cards to get through the Mr. Mime, I'm not really trying to lose one of my Mr. Mimes to that Pokemon. So instead I would promote the Mamoswine GL to help us get through that attacker for the turn, and then kind of use it as like a sacrifice. And now you will notice it has 4 retreat costs, but it is an SP Pokemon, which means it works with Poketurn. So if you know what Crobat does, the Mamoswine GL is actually like a more effective Crobat if our opponent can't get the knockout. We could attack with Shuppet, promote the Mamoswine, it knocks out our opponent's current active Pokemon, and then after they attack into our Mamoswine, coming back into our turn, their next active Pokemon would take 10 damage, and then we Poketurn the Mamoswine and attack with Shuppet again and repeat the process. So it's the other Pokemon that we would promote after we attack with the Dunsparce or the Shuppet, the Mamoswine GL. But that's basically it. There were some other additions to Shuppet decks that other people had played, like Spiritomb and stuff like that, but I was never a big fan of Spiritomb in the Shuppet deck. The other attacker we have in the deck, pretty much the only other attacker that we have in the deck, is the Mankey. 50 HP. It's got that extra punch attack for 1 fighting energy that says if your opponent's active is a level X Pokemon, this attack does 50 more damage. You can hit for 60 damage with the Mankey with the extra punch, which isn't a whole ton, and then we're leaving a Mankey in our active, which doesn't have the ability of Mr. Mime, so it's pretty easy to KO, but Luxray, one of the most popular attackers in the SP deck, or played in Luxchamp at the very least, which was the most popular deck in the format, is weak to fighting. So to keep up the prize trade up against the SP decks that generally have 210 HP, which means Shuppet can't always get there for the knockout on their level X's, but can get the knockout on the pre-level X's, Mankey could come in to clean up some KOs on those Luxrays to keep us ahead in the prize exchange. So the Mankey was really important for the SP matchup to keep us in the back and forth against Luxray, against Luxchamp, the most popular deck. Next, we have the Unknown Q. So the Mr. Mime, once it's in the active, does have 1 retreat cost, so we have to find a way to be able to retreat it back into Shuppet so we can attack with Shuppet once again, and that's where these Unknown Qs come in. Maybe the most powerful pivot card ever created in the Pokemon TCG, to be honest, because it's a Pokemon, which means you can search for it with stuff like Roseanne's Research or Collector, or in the current day and age, you could find this with Nest Ball or Ultra Ball, and then you can put it onto your active Pokemon with its ability that then reduces the retreat cost of your active Pokemon by 1. Only by 1, but that's all that Mr. Mime has, so that's all we need to then move our Mr. Mime back into our Shuppet or into our Dunsparce, and then attack once again with the Fade Out. So yeah, Unknown Q, one of the most powerful pivot cards ever created in the Pokemon TCG, because it is a Pokemon and not a tool card, and it's easier to find Pokemon cards generally than tool cards. Up next, we got 3 Crobat with the Flash Bite ability that says when we play this card from our hand onto our bench, we may put 1 damage counter on one of our opponent's Pokemon. So we combine this with the plus powers and the Expert Belt on the Shuppet to take knockouts turn to turn, depending on what how much HP our opponent's active Pokemon has. We actually do play 4 Poketurn in here and a couple other cards. The Poketurn allows you to pick up an SP Pokemon, like I already explained, that we utilize with the Mamoswine, so we can reuse Flash Bite multiple times throughout a turn or throughout a game to get like some cheesy KOs on stuff like Baltoys, even potentially. Baltoy is like very powerful setup Pokemon that tries to evolve to Claydol, but if we can KO with Flash Bites before it evolves, then they never get to their Claydol, and we get kind of like a free prize card for turn if we can like knock out their active with the Shuppet, knock out their Baltoy with Crobats, kind of get like a double prize turn potentially. Oh, yes, one more thing I'm going to mention about the Mankey as an attacker, pretty much in here just for the Luxray, but a card that I didn't really know was a card that was being played, that I discovered was being played at US Nationals that year, was ERL, which is Entei Raikou Legend. And that card does 80 damage to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon, or actually it does 80 damage to all bench Pokemon in play, or all Pokemon in play, I forget, to be honest, that have a Poke Power. So we have a lot of Poke Powers, as you can see. We got the Crobats. I mean, the Unknown Qs won't. We do play some Uxies over here as well, which we'll get to in a second. Those have powers as well, and this is our main setup Pokemon. So you can basically draw a bunch of prize cards in a turn with ERL, and I didn't know it was a card until my opponent used it against me in one of my games at Nationals. Now, they didn't win the game with the ERL, though. They got a lot of prize cards that they're about to win on the next turn, but ERL is weak to fighting. And a Mankey with 4+ powers and an Expert Belt does just enough damage to KO ERL. The other thing about the Legend Pokemon is they're worth 2 prize cards. So at the end of one of my games in round like 3 or 4, if I remember correctly, my opponent uses ERL, goes down to 1 prize card. I have 2 prize cards left. I thought I was just over and I just lose. I look at my hand. How do I deal with this? What can I do? And then I was like, oh, ERL is weak to fighting. Mankey is fighting type. I have 4+ power and an expert belt in my hand. Extra punch for the knockout. Draw my last 2 prize cards and I win the game. And then I proceed to do that against another Luxchamp player later in the tournament as well. Coming up with a play that I didn't even know the Mankey was good for until my until my opponent played the ERL against me. Uxie, maybe the most powerful draw support Pokemon in the game ever printed with the setup ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may draw until you have 7 cards in your hand with its Poke Power, and you can use as many of them as you want during your turn. Now, the reason this wasn't broken back in the day is because the games were a lot slower, so bench space was a lot more important. Using 3 or 2 or 3 Uxie and putting those on your bench means you have no bench space to set up powerful Pokemon for later in the game, and overall be more of a hindrance than a help. So most decks ran 1 Uxie that you could use in the early game if you needed it, but you never really wanted to use the Uxie if you could avoid it because bench space was so much more important back in 2010. This deck, a little bit less concerned with bench space because our attacker goes back to our hand, which always frees up a bench space, and the only Pokemon we're really trying to set up is the Mr. Mime. So we play a little bit heavier of an Uxie count here because we are a little bit more aggressive of a deck. So 3 Uxie in here because we don't want to prize them. We do want to naturally draw into them, stuff like that. Now, with how important it is to find our plus powers and our expert belts, we play cards like the Unknown R, which has an ability that literally says you can put it on your bench and then discard it and then draw 1 card. So we're effectively trying to play as small of a deck as possible to increase our chances of seeing the plus powers and the expert belts as soon as possible. So Unknown R literally just makes it so we effectively play a 56 card deck. And we actually play more cards in here that effectively make us play an even smaller deck. Last Pokemon in the deck is the Regice with the Regimove ability. Discard 2 cards from your hand, and then have your opponent move their active basic Pokemon with one of their benched Pokemon. So the Regimove on the Regice was used for multiple reasons. The main one was to thin cards out of our hand, so we could then Uxie for more cards. And the secondary reason was to move Spiritomb out of our opponent's active. Our Spiritomb said, or had an ability, Poke Power and Poke, not an ability. This is a Poke Power, Poke Body. It had a Poke Body that said, while it's in the active, neither you nor your opponent can play item cards. And our main damage source is item cards. Also, tool cards back in the day were also item cards, but I guess that changed just recently changed in the current day and age of Pokemon TCG. So we wouldn't be able to play plus powers. We couldn't play our expert belts. Our Shuffle would be doing like 30 damage, which eventually would get through a Spiritomb. But if we want to be more aggressive, we want to get that Spiritomb out of the active as soon as possible. And that's what we use the Regimove for. Or if our opponent had an active basic Pokemon that was a little bit too big for us to deal with right now, we could push that to the bench, have our opponent bring anything else up that we could more easily KO, get that knockout, and proceed from there. Got the Regice in there. For our supporters, kept it simple. Only 2 different supporters in this deck. For Pokemon Collector, our deck is all basic Pokemon, and Pokemon Collector searches your deck for 3 basic Pokemon, which is pretty powerful when our draw power is Uxie, which is a basic Pokemon. Our extra damage is Crobat, which is a basic Pokemon. The Pokemon as our main attacker is Shuppet or Dunsparce, which is a basic Pokemon. And the only thing we need to set up to prevent our opponent from being able to do what they want is the Mr. Mime, which is also a basic Pokemon. And the way to pivot Mr. Mime is Unknown Q, which is also a basic Pokemon. And if we ever just have a hand that's really, really big and we just want to be able to progress through our deck a little bit more aggressively, we could just like Collector for 3 Unknown R and then use our Unknown Rs and continue to progress through our deck. So for Pokemon Collector, all you really need besides the Buck's Training. Buck's Training says draw 2 cards, and then your active Pokemon does 10 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So it's not necessary. Like, the draw power from Buck's Training isn't the important part. The extra damage is nice. I think if we could just play 6 collectors, we would, to be honest. But because games were so long back in the day, we were sitting there and drawing 6 prize cards usually. We need some other supporters to kind of fill those turns where we are still, drawing through our prize cards, basically. So Buck's Training helps really helps a ton with that. It draws us a couple cards per turn, lets us do plus 10 damage, which can get us to some bigger knockouts, and it kind of just fills the void. It's like the best supporter to play to kind of fill the void of, well, we have to go still play this game for the next like 2 to 3 turns. We may as well play a supporter for turn. Okay, Buck's Training sounds pretty good. Like I said, if we could, we probably would play 6 collectors, but you can't do that. That's cheating. For Pokédex, I mentioned earlier that we play more cards that effectively make us play less than 60 cards in our deck. Pokédex looks at the top 2 cards of your deck. You take one, and then you put the other on the bottom of your deck. So effectively, we play a 52 card deck with 4 Unknown R and 4 Pokedex. But wait, there's more. We play 4 Poke Drawer Plus, which says if you play one of these, you draw a single card. But if you play 2 of them at the same time, you can search your deck for any 2 cards. So if we are lucky enough, fortunate enough to draw into 2 at the same time throughout our draw sequence, go search your deck for literally anything. If we end up with only one of them, still we get to aggressively draw, continue to draw through our deck to find the really important cards, which are the Plus Power and the Expert Belts. And actually another card that we haven't mentioned yet is the Energy cards, which are also very important to find. And we also play the other Poke Plus card in the deck, the Poke Blower Plus. If you play one of these, you can flip a coin. If heads, deal 1 damage counter to one of your opponent's Pokemon, or place 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And if you play 2 of them at the same time, you can gust up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active. So not only would we hope to go second and get off a turn 1 attack with Shuppet, but if we found something like the double Pokeball Plus, we could KO a very important Pokemon on our opponent's side of the field on the first turn of the game and completely dismantle their setup. And at the very least, we could always just play it, flip a coin. If we get heads, we get to put 1 damage counter somewhere. If not, it does nothing, but then we get to draw more cards with the Uxie. On top of all that, those aggressive cards, we play some more aggression here. The Super Scoop Ups. Now, we do have 4 Poketurn in here that we're coming up to here in just a second, but we also have some Super Scoop Ups, which can not only be great to pick up our Crobat with and reuse our Crobat. Oh, for anyone who doesn't know what Super Scoop Up does, flip a coin. If heads, pick up one of your Pokemon and put it into your hand, and all cards attached to it. So this could be a way to get more damage out of our Crobats, or to draw more cards with our Uxies. So great utility card to have in the deck, and if we do hit tails, we could then have 1 less card in our hand to then draw more cards with our next Uxie. Super aggressive deck, the 4 Super Scoop Up. We got 2 War Point in here, just some extra switch cards to work with. Really powerful on that first turn of the game, like I mentioned with the Poke Blower Pluses. If our opponent only has like 2 Pokemon in play, because when you went first in the TCG back in 2010, you couldn't play any trainers, stadiums, or supporters. So your setup initially on that first turn, if you go first, wouldn't be too good. You might get a couple Pokemon down and then be trying to evolve on that following turn. But the War Point could force up one of those more important bench Pokemon of our opponent into the active, and then we'd be able to KO that for our first attack of the turn. I mentioned them a couple times. Here they are, the 4 Poketurn. Just help us reset the Crobats, get some more damage. It's effectively plus 10 damage for each Poketurn alongside the Crobats. And then also to move the Mamoswine if we ever send the Mamoswine to the active after using the Fade Out. 1 copy of Luxury Ball, one of the most powerful Pokemon search cards ever in the game. It's an item card, or I guess it's just a trainer card back in the day. Back in the day, there wasn't item cards. It was just trainer cards and supporter cards. That's how you kind of... with the difference between it wasn't like a trainer card that's a supporter card, it was just trainer cards and then supporter cards. But Luxury Ball, search your deck for literally any Pokemon, excluding Pokemon level X, but if you had a Luxury Ball in your discard pile, you could not play Luxury Ball. Most decks only ran 1, but a couple decks did run 2 decks that could like aggressively discard cards from your hand, like the Gyarados deck that played the Regice as well, played the exact same Regice to discard the Magic cards from hand. You played multiple Luxury Balls sometimes in there. I've seen some builds that play the multiple Luxury Ball because you would be able to aggressively discard it as you found it throughout the rest of the game. Also, you had Felicity's Drawing, which discarded 2 cards and then drew 4 cards. Same reason, it's a dead card, but if you have something like the Register, the Felicity's Drawing to discard it, you're not worried about it clogging your hand or going back into your deck and being able to play around late game hand disruption. We do have some Pokemon recovery in here as well. The Time Space Distortion. Flip 3 coins for each heads. Search your discard pile for a Pokemon and put it into your hand. I actually never played this card in a tournament. I didn't play this. So this is not the exact 60 cards I played to win the regional championships in 2010, but it's pretty close to the exact 60. Yeah, pretty close to the exact 60. It's the exact same archetype. But the Time Space Distortions back in the day, I could not afford. Back in the day, this was like not that expensive of a card. Maybe it was like $50. I don't really remember, to be honest. But yeah, I could not afford Time Space Distortions back in the day. So instead, I played Pokemon Rescue, which was a trainer card that said search your discard pile for 1 Pokemon and put it to your hand. But the Time Space Distortion, even though you're flipping coins, you are flipping 3, and you're usually content with just getting 1 heads. But if you can get away with 2 or even 3, it's that much better. Especially using these to just cycle Unknown R. Use an Unknown R, use another Unknown R, use a Time Space Distortion, hit 2 heads, recover the 2 Unknown Rs, bench both Unknown Rs, use both Unknown Rs, draw 2 more cards, repeat. Yeah, you definitely prefer the Time Space Distortion to those Pokemon Rescues. I know it's flipping coins, and a lot of you guys hate flipping coins, but yeah, trust me, it's better. For the energy count, so we don't need a lot of energy in this deck. We put 1 energy on our Shuppet or on our Dunsparce, use Fade Out, and it returns to our hand. And that's it. So I only play 4 energy cards in here, 3 rainbows for the Mankey, because we do want to be able to attack with the Mankey. Now, we have no way to search for energy. The only reason I play the single basic psychic energy is because there was a Shedinja, I want to say, back in the day that said Pokemon with special energy on them can't deal damage to this Pokemon. So I ran the one basic psychic to play around Shedinja. Although it wasn't really like a popular card that anyone was really playing. I was scared of it locally or whatever. I don't know why I really played this, to be honest. But I've kept it in here anyways. It's possible that instead of playing the basic psychic, there should be like a cyclone energy in here. Cyclone energy said when you attach this to your active Pokemon, your opponent switches their active Pokemon with one of their bench Pokemon. So another way to kind of push your opponent's Pokemon out of the active. And cyclone wasn't basic specific like the Regice. The Regice says if your opponent's a basic Pokemon, they have to move it. I believe you could use Regice's ability no matter what. Even if it wasn't a basic Pokemon, you could still use Regice's ability to discard 2 cards from your hand. I believe someone can correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong. But cyclone energy, I believe, just said your opponent's active gets pushed no matter what. Even if it's an evolution Pokemon, it's going to the bench and they got to send something else back up. So cyclone energy could be cool for the Dunsparce because Dunsparce attacks for colorless energy. Cyclone is a colorless energy, so you can attach to the Dunsparce. After you put it in the active, they have to send something else off their bench, and then you fade out, hit that instead of whatever their active Pokemon was. Also another way to potentially push the Spiritomb out of the active. That could be such a hindrance to our initial setup. Yeah, this is the energy count that I ended up running at, not actually at the regional championships, I believe, but at the national championships. I ran 1 basic psychic and then 3 rainbow energy. The rainbow energy, of course, like I mentioned, are for the Mankey, so we can use Mankey to KO Luxrays and apparently ERL as well. And that is the 60 cards, the Shuppet deck that I used to win the New England Regional Championships in 2010 in the Masters Division, and I took to a top 128 finish at the U.S. National Championships that year as well. I lost to a Tyranitar deck in top 128. I remember being a really, really close set, and I was pretty bummed after I lost. But yeah, this is the deck that I used for that. It's a really sick deck. It's not as good against some of the top decks that ended up performing really, really well at Worlds that year. But the deck's a ton of fun. So if you're looking to build a retro deck for back in the day that can keep up with Luxchamp and can keep up with some of the other decks in the format, then I recommend trying this out. I'm gonna do something a little bit different here to close out this video. I'm actually going to play a hand with this deck so y'all can see how the deck kind of operates. I've never done anything like this, a one-sided game of Pokemon. We're just going to go ahead and assume that I'm going second here in this pretend match, because if you go first in 2010, you can't play any trainers, supporters, or stadiums, and that would lead for a not very exciting turn of Pokemon here. But I'm just going to play one hand of Pokemon cards here, show y'all what this deck can do on the first turn of the game. Some people call this deck the Shuppet Donk deck. Now, it can attack on the first turn of the game for a lot of damage, which a lot of decks back then couldn't do. Decks were not putting up numbers like Shuppet could on the first turn of the game, but definitely don't consider it a Donk deck. Once you get the Mankey in there, the Mamoswine, the Bucks Trading, you have a little bit more late game than a lot of people think. And yeah, I don't really consider the Shuppet deck a Donk deck. It can Donk, and to donk means to just knock out your opponent's lone Pokemon in play, whether you went first or second. If your opponent just has 1 Pokemon and you knock it out basically before they get to play the game, that is what's considered a donk. But yeah, the deck definitely had a decent amount of late game against a majority of the popular matchups in the format. So here we go. I'm gonna play out a hand here as if I'm going second, so we can play the trainers, the supporters, and the stadiums here. Give me my 7 cards. Let's see what we got here. So looks like we got that Crobat start. We don't want to play the Uxie here because the Uxie is going to be our draw power. Let's lay out my prize cards here as well. And let's see how much damage we can do on this first turn as if we are going second. I don't know how much HP my opponent's active Pokemon has or how many Pokemon they have, but let's see what we can do. Another Pokedex. Okay, so let's start with the Pokedex here. We look at the top 2. Double Pokejar. Ooh, we got a Pokejar in hand. So we'll take a Pokejar, put a Pokejar on the bottom of the deck. I'm not going to use the Pokejars yet, though. Let's go into another Pokedex. Take a look at the top 2. Plus Power and Super Scoop Up. I feel like I want the plus power here. Grab that again, and let's go into another Pokedex. Look at the top 2. Ooh, I think I want the plus power here as well. Did I just mess up the sequence on one of those Pokedexes? I don't think so. All right. Double Jar Plus. We're going all out here. So Double Jar Plus. Search our deck for any 2 cards. I'm going to get Pokemon Collector, and if we're trying to maximize our damage here, we already have an Expert Belt. We could grab the energy here, but I'm just going to go ahead and say we're going to draw into the energy here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these 2, play the Pokemon Collector. I'm going to grab the Shuppet and maybe some unknown R's here. So this is basically how you could sequence out this. If we're trying to just maximize our damage output here, we're going to go like this. There we go. And the way we're going to sequence this is we're going to bench Shuppet, bench the unknown R's, and we're going to use the Uxie here first. Load up our Shuppet. We're an energy short still, but we're going to get there. And then we're going to set up for 6 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's fine. All right, I'm going to go ahead and quick to the Crobat. And when I Poke-turn the Crobat, I'll pick up the quick later. Let's say we like our opponent's bench Pokemon a little bit more than we like their active. So we'll play the War Point. Shuppet comes up to the active. We got a Pokeblower here. I'm not waiting for the second one. Let's do as much damage as we want, or as we possibly can. Tails, I'm going to go ahead and Poke-turn the Crobat back to the hand. I will bench the Crobat, hit him with a Flash Bite, and we're going to go ahead and quick back to the Crobat. And then we're going to set up again for 5 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Uh-oh. Don't have the energy quite yet. Hold up. We got some retires to do, though. Retire number 1. Draw a card. That's a Super Scoop Up. Let's go with a Super Scoop Up here. See what we get. That's a heads. I'm going to pick up an Uxie back to the hand. Let's go ahead and bench the Mr. Mime. I'll then Poke-turn the Crobat. Flash Bite, damage somewhere on my opponent's field. Quick to the Mr. Mime. We're assuming they don't have Power Spray. Play the Time Space Distortion, or hang on, let's see, how many retire do we have in here? We only have 1 retire in here, so we might get multiple heads, so let's go and retire again. Draw another card. It's a Super Scoop Up. I will then play the Time Space Distortion here, and we got a heads, I believe. Heads. All right, well, I only have 2 unknown R's in here, so we're going to grab 2 unknown R's. These go back to the hand. I'll bench both of those. I will retire one of them, draw another card. Uh-oh, our hand's getting kind of clogged here. Let's go with a Super Scoop Up. It's a heads. We'll pick up an Uxie. I got 2 Uxie in the hand. So our hand is pretty clogged here at this point. Oh, we do have the Regice, though. Well, let's go ahead and let's use Regice then. Let's say we don't need, I don't know, the Pokemon Collector and the Dunsparce here. We'll give up those, use the Regice, and then I'll go ahead and set up for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's the Rainbow Energy. I'm attached to my Shuppet. Okay, let's play a Pokemon Blower here. See if we can deal another damage. That's a heads. That's another damage. We'll Poke-turn the Crobat. Go ahead and, whoa, I'm throwing it around. Flash Bite again onto my opponent's Pokemon. Retire the unknown here to draw another card. Another Pokemon Collector. We've already played our supporter for turn, but we're going to go even further. I'm going to go ahead and unknown quick to the Crobat on this side of the field. I will Uxie one more time for 1, 2, 3, 4. Play a Pokejar, lone Pokejar, so we just draw a card. Got another War Point if we want to play it. Throw out another Pokeblower. Why not? Another heads, another 10 damage out there somewhere. I don't know where it's going, but it's going somewhere. And then we'll go ahead and fade out, returning the Shuppet to our hand with all of the cards attached. Promote the Mr. Mime, which needs our opponent's active Pokemon to have 3 energy cards on it for it to be able to attack. And then this is our hand at the end of our turn. We did, I don't know, we hit like 2 heads on Pokeblowers. There's 1 Poke-turn, 2 Poke-turn, 3 Poke-turn. That's 5, 6. We pinged like 6 damage with Crobat, and then we faded out for 80. Now, depending on what I was up against, I probably wouldn't have sequenced this game exactly like I just did, but that's just to kind of show you the potential this deck can have on that first turn of the game. And yeah, that is the Shuppet deck, my Shuppet deck from 2010. I hope y'all enjoyed this video, especially the gameplay at the end here, just to kind of show you the potential of this deck. I enjoyed this one. Hope y'all enjoyed it as well, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.